questions from the audience? Beautiful. All right, what that means for you guys is whenever you feel ready, the time is all yours.
All right. Oftentimes we all hear about stories or watch specials on the History Channel about ancient treasure lost at sea or buried in the desert somewhere, but almost never do we hear about it, treasure like that happening or being found in our region, in our state. What if I told you that in our state, still hidden, there's $2 million in northern Minnesota? Now, interesting thing about money is that every day, you and I, all of us, we deal with it on a day-to-day basis. We make money transactions face-to-face, through department stores or gas stations and things like that, and then also online transactions. In addition to that, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have a bank account in which you store your money and believe it to be safe. Now, the $2 million that I previously told you about came from what is called the Brinks robbery. And it happened 60 years ago, and we will be talking to you guys about the company that was robbed, the Brinks company, and then we will be moving into the actual robbery that occurred, and then finally ending with the aftermath of the heist.
To begin, we will look at what Brinks actually is. According to Brinks.com, the official website of Brinks Incorporated, copyright 2012, Brinks is a security and protection agency that was started in 1859 by Carrie and Fidela Brink. Now their headquarters are in Richmond, Virginia, and the current CEO is Thomas Schiedelbein. They have over 650 branches in over 100 countries. So they are a massive company and they're worldwide. They employ over 70,000 people, so they're a large part of our world economy. Now, according to the book Private Security in the 21st Century, written by Dr. Edward Maggio in 2008, the biggest thing Brinks did was invent the armored truck. They invented the first fully armored truck in 1927. This is very important to all of your money because everyone who has a bank account and money is stored in a bank, it's all transferred through these armored trucks, and that's how it's kept safe. Now, what they do basically is provide security services to companies, banks, jewelers, and also private sectors if you have anything that's worth enough. The biggest thing they've done is they transported the Hope Diamond, which is an extremely rare diamond that has a blue tint to it because of a small amount of boron. Now this diamond is valued between $200 and $250 million and is now kept in the Smithsonian Museum. Now the only reason they were able to do this is because this company is so trusted. Now they also are responsible for our federal money and our Federal Reserve money and transfer it through their Brinks trucks. As I said earlier, they are a worldwide company and 75% of their revenue comes from different countries and all the jobs they provide there. Now they've become even larger and they provide logistics, which, as you all know from the UPS commercials, is the flow of goods and services. And they've even branched out into subsidiary companies such as Broadview Security. So all of you can contact this company and have it for your own home security.
Next, we will look at the planning involved in the robbery and the robbery itself. You all have heard the saying, practice makes perfect. You all practice for tests. Most importantly, you probably practice for the speech itself in hopes of getting a better grade. Well, Joseph McGiggins was the originator of this heist. He hired 7 other men to assist him with the robbery. According to CrimeMagazine.com, edited by a member of the United Press, last updated in 2012, the gang prepared this robbery for 1.5 years. They observed the employees' daily routine from an apartment building nearby. They also would break into the building after hours and take lock cylinders out of the doors that were in place. They would then bring these lock cylinders to a locksmith to have fake keys made so they could easily gain access to the building when the actual robbery began. They also, when they'd sneak in at night, they'd memorize the layout of the building and how they were going to enter and exit the building to make it go as smooth as possible. They also took into account where the employees would be sitting and what they would be doing during the time that they entered. On top of all the entering of the Brinks building itself before the robbery, they also broke into a Boston security system store and stole plans for the alarm system in the Brinks building itself. This gave them a lot of insight in how all the security locks worked, how the alarms worked, how everything would work inside the building. They studied the schedules of the employees by observing them from the apartment across the street, by looking at when the lights would turn on and off. They, like I said before, they ran the practice runs after hours when there were no employees in the building and there wasn't a suspicion of a robbery about to happen. So as you can see, this is the Brinks building itself. In 1950s, it was one of the largest Brinks holding facilities that the company owned. Today, it's now a parking garage in East Boston. And then this next picture, right here, this is the Brinks building itself, and this is Prince Street, that separates the two buildings. This was the apartment building that the criminals stayed in for nearly 1.5 years, where they could easily see into the other building to gain an insight into what the employees were doing at night.
According to FBI.gov, a federal government website, a group of masked men broke into the Brinks building at 7 to 7:30 a.m. on January 17th, 1950. They did this after 6 aborted attempts that they had, and to get into the building, they wore clothing that would make them look like Brinks employees, which would be navy pea coats, a chauffeur cap, and then they would also wear Halloween masks, gloves, and rubber-soled shoes that would make them less easily detected. Once they got into the building, they did very little talking because they had it so planned out that they didn't need to talk to each other anymore. And then when they got in, they had to break 3 and possibly 4 doors down to get into the second level where the employees were storing and checking the money that was brought to the building that day. That would be like the money you would bring into your bank and have them transport it there. And they held the employees at gunpoint and made them lie face down, and they taped their mouths shut with adhesive tape. The only real problem they had during the heist was that there was a buzzer sound, and that was from one of the garage attendants. He was trying to get into one of the vaults, and actually he was trying and then just left and had no idea that there was actually a robbery going on, and that's why he couldn't get in. At the end, they got away with $1.3 million in cash and $1.6 million in checks and money orders. According to Time magazine, this was the crime of the century. This was the Great Brinks Robbery, and they agreed afterwards to spend 6 years not touching any of the money so that the statutes of limitations would have been met and they could get away scotch-free. Even though initially, for the robbers, it seemed like they got away smooth, they planned it out perfect, everything went great, this is only where the story began. The entire investigation had still yet to come. Almost hours, even minutes after the robbery occurred, investigators, law enforcement, and personnel such as that immediately sprang into action in order to catch these robbers. You have to remember that during this time, this is a lot of money, and this was one of the pictures you saw was one of the largest holding facilities that Brinks owned. So this was a huge deal, and someone was going to get in huge trouble if the money didn't get found. So the law enforcement and personnel had to figure out what's the first plan of action, where do we go first, how do we go to find this money? What they decided was that because it's in Boston, a huge crime area for gangs at the time, they would start with gang affiliations and hoodlums, as stated by the Brinks robbery titled website by the FBI, last updated January 17th, 2012. This website went on to say that because this was such a huge deal to this area, tension spread across the region because there was also Brinks buildings around the surrounding areas and cities. These buildings began to be like, hey, are they going to come at us next? I mean, they had to be ready for anything that happened. So tension spread immediately throughout the surrounding areas. And because of that, it became front page news, literally. For the weeks to come, it was always in the news. Citizens would constantly be looking at the paper, trying to get updates on the investigations and what had been found. In an effort to catch the robbers and recover the money, the Brinks company itself offered a $100,000 reward for anyone who could come up with any substantial information such as who the people are, obviously most important, where the money could be, and realistically any information that could possibly help them in catching the robbers. This actually proved to be somewhat of a downfall because for a few reasons. Number one, $100,000, even in today's time, is a lot of money, but in the 1950s, a lot of money. So people really wanted to get this reward, so they became paranoid, and they would look at their neighbors and think like, maybe I see my neighbor walking outside with their hood up getting their paper, I just found a Brink robber, and they'd be calling in. All citizens would be calling in constantly, trying to say, hey, I found the Brinks robber. And this ended up being bad for the law enforcement because there's only so many people that can follow all these leads that are calling in. And eventually they found out that almost none of these calls provided any real information. Now, also stated by the Brinks robbery FBI website, there was not enough evidence initially on scene to make any real advancements in the case. Some of the things that they did find, number one, when they first got on scene, the employees of the Brinks building had been tied up and gagged, and blindfolded as well. But before they were blindfolded, they were able to ascertain a few different descriptions about the robbers themselves. After questioning, the Brinks employees told law enforcement that the height and rough descriptions of the robbers, but nothing real concrete. As far as the rope and tape used, the robbers did happen to leave behind a lot of rope and tape used for tying up the employees, like I said, but also actually obtaining the money. They used several things like that, and also breaking in. So they left behind a few things like that. But one of the interesting things about that is that because it's the 1950s, CSI teams and things like that weren't really prevalent, so they weren't able to do a lot with this type of evidence. It didn't really help them. They weren't able to take a lot of DNA evidence from it. So the case, again, didn't really move any more forward. Probably one of the most notable evidence found at the scene that actually did help them was they found 4 revolvers that were stolen by the robbers and used in case of any gunfight or that type of thing that would have possibly have had to happen, which it didn't. But the robbers left behind these revolvers, which had their serial numbers still intact. So from there, law enforcement would then look up the store in which it was bought and question the store employees. Now, the investigation itself didn't really move very forward in the first few weeks of the investigation, which alarmed a lot of people. Because this was such a large amount of money, and because the Brinks company was so well respected before this, they were kind of behind the 8 ball at this point. They needed to get this money back, or there was going to be a lot of questions asked. So the next thing they did, they needed to do something. The next thing they did was to interview as many people as possible to try and get as much information as possible in order to catch these criminals. They had to interview everyone they possibly could. Now, like I said before, there's limited amount of law enforcement personnel, which means because there's a lot of people, that means there needs to be a lot of people to interview those people. So they had to kind of break it down. Where do we start first? Who do we interview? Who's the most important? Who's going to give us the best information? They started with what's called the North Boston neighborhood, which, because the building that you saw before is in the northern part of Boston. So they started with those surrounding neighborhoods, asking anyone from families, from corporate investors, anyone that could possibly have any information leading to the robbers. This proved to be somewhat ineffective. So the next thing they decided to do was, who do we interview next? Who could actually give us some information? Because we really, like I said, we're behind the 8 ball, we really need to figure something out. So the next thing they did was, they looked at the current and past employees of the Brinks building. Because from here they can understand who's working for us, who might possibly be giving inside information to these robbers, because what they didn't know at the time was that the robbers were breaking in, but at the time they thought they had been getting some inside information from some of the workers. So then they interviewed all these people. Again, nothing was advancing in the case. And from here, they weren't able really to find any information through the interviewing process.
According to FBI.gov, published on July 10, 2010, there is many key evidences that helped solve this case. The first one, on January 17, 1950, through an interview, the FBI were informed that there was a green Ford truck outside of the Brinks building around the time that the robbery occurred. Also, another good piece of evidence was given to the FBI on February 4th, 1950, And a group of little kids were playing on a sandbar along the lake in Somerville, Massachusetts, when they found one of the revolvers that the robbers stole. They knew that it was the right gun because of the serial numbers that they had recorded. Also, on March 4th, 1950, the green Ford truck that was seen outside of the Brinks building was found in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and it was crushed and torn into pieces so you could hardly recognize it. Once the FBI put it together and traced the car back, they traced it to a car dealer in Boston, Massachusetts that reported it stolen just a week before the robbery happened. This was a key piece of evidence because it led the FBI to two of the people involved because they lived in the Stoughton, Massachusetts area. Also, another big evidence that the FBI was given was they received an anonymous call that stated that the guy was going to send the FBI a letter with the names of the suspects. Although this letter had a lot of suspects, only one of them ended up being involved in the case, but this did help lead them to the others that were involved because once they found the guy, they could ask him who else was involved. According to Boston Looking Back, which is the Boston Chronicle, published on January 17th, 2010, it was very difficult and a long process to catch the robberies. In fact, they did not even directly catch them. O'Keefe and Gusciera, two of the people involved in the robbery, also contributed to another robbery in Pennsylvania, which they were caught in and put into prison. While they were in prison, one of the guards overheard them talking about how they could use their money from Brinks, if they had it yet, to bail them out of jail. They then were investigated and questioned about the Brinks robbery, but during the investigation they remained quiet so that the FBI had no evidence of them, so they could not put them to trial. Once O'Keefe got out of jail, he still had not received his part of the Brinks money, so therefore he kidnapped Vincent Costa in order to demand his part of the money. Once Pino, one of the main men of the robbery, heard about this, he became very angry and hired a hitman in order to go after O'Keefe. The hitman was supposed to kill O'Keefe, but he only injured him enough, sending him to the hospital. Once the FBI heard that O'Keefe was in the hospital, they visited him there and gave him another interview. It was here in the hospital where O'Keefe admitted everything and put all of them responsible behind bars. On January 12, 1956, almost exactly 6 years after the robbery had taken place, they were all put in jail. They were all sentenced to life besides O'Keefe, who gave the police the information, so they gave him a break. According to historystory.blogspot.com, written by Brian Bolton, an American bank executive, written on January 17, 2012, almost none of the money was recovered. In fact, only $58,000 of the $2.7 million was ever recovered. And it is also rumored that most of the money is hidden in the northern hills of Minnesota, up by Grand Rapids. Now that we have looked at what the Brinks Company is, the actual robbery itself, and the aftermath of the crime, we are all aware of the Brinks robbery that happened almost 60 years ago. And the money is anywhere in our backyards, so start digging.
Hey, same thing, those of you doing the written critiques, feel free to continue. As we go through, ladies, gents, if you guys just want to